Today we have got some scary insights coming straight from the top prisons in Russia that can shake any good man's heart.
But it's no ordinary prison. This facility has spawned legends. The mere sight of this statue has broken the most soulless butchers.
What else can you expect from a place where the world's worst criminals are imprisoned? So sit back and hang on tight. This video will surely send chills down your spine. Polar Owl Prison. Situated in North Russia, high on the Arctic Circle, this prison is tucked away in a remote location in the middle of nowhere. The whole place is covered in a thick blanket of snow, where the temperatures go as low as -58 degrees Fahrenheit. You would freeze to death within minutes. If that isn't wild, the eerie silence around the prison is enough to turn anyone crazy. The nearest area of civilization isn't as close, and it could take up to 3 days to find a breathing community in the vicinity of the prison. The inmates are brought on a train first, and then on a private bus to the correctional facility for a long life sentence. The idea of an escape doesn't even cross the minds of the prisoners. The extreme temperature of the prison is only one part of the prison that is brutal. The other side of the story is just as scary. The Owl Prison is one of the deadliest prisons in the country, where even serious offenders turn their faces away while talking about the psychological conditions inside the facility. A serious offender who had taken away the lives of around 60 people was brought to his senses when he spent the nights in the Owl Prison. He claimed that it was better to be dead than be kept captive in this prison. That statement alone was enough to send shockwaves throughout the entire internet. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. When you look inside the prison, you will realize why it holds true to its reputation. Now, there is adequate space inside the prison. From single beds to double beds, the facility does not feel too crammed with inmates. But here's the catch. They cannot sit, sleep, or even lie down on the bed until the clock hits the 10 p.m. mark and the lights go off. Apart from the confinement of the small room, there isn't a lot that the inmates can do around here. From their small rooms, they are allowed to go for a walk for 1 hour and 30 minutes. It isn't a walk in the park, though. The space is pretty tiny and is almost like another confinement room with iron bars for a ceiling. You can only walk a few feet in the trapped cage. The meshed ceiling allows inmates to look at the sky and feel only a tiny ball of freedom in their chests. But that doesn't last long, because the guards are stationed at the top of these iron bars to keep a lookout on the inmates while they pace around the 4 towering concrete walls. But here is where it gets really depressing. There are not more than 300 inmates inside the large facility. That means it gives the prison authorities the right to strip the inmates of human bonding and force them into solitary confinement for the rest of their sentences. And that's exactly what happens. Inmates are kept in their cells for long, cold days, and they pass out their whole sentences without talking to another inmate. Some prisoners do have a roommate with them, but they can only talk in hushed whispers. To top it all off, there are no cafeterias and no joint exercises that allow the inmates to even have a 2-minute conversation. Some of the inmates do not even have visitors. The ones that do get a visitor can have a meeting that only lasts for a few minutes and not more than once in the whole year. Most of the visitors have to go through a tiring procedure to apply for the remote trip to prison, which is why some prisoners never meet their loved ones. Plus, it isn't easy coming down here either. This pattern of psychological torture has even forced one prisoner to make a drastic attempt at escaping. But he hadn't run too far when he found himself in the ferocious grasp of canine dogs ready to tear him apart. He was saved by the guards just in time. But the man couldn't bear his punishments after his attempted escape and passed away a few months later. There was no attempt to flee after that. The routine is pretty monotonous too. You can only watch a few selected movies and have a predefined meal plan that mostly has bland dishes. The controlled life of these inmates living day to night and night to day in a boring routine might make you feel bad about them. But the inmates that do come here are serious offenders or political terrorists with a shocking criminal record tagged around their necks. So, most people believe the punishments are justified, but here is where it gets really controversial. For more than 2 years, this prison had the vile reputation that its inmates were forced to make a false confession. Some reports said that there were around 200 fake turnouts, while another source reports 32 turnouts. It is unclear whether it was all true because the matter was quieted down pretty fast, suggesting that the higher authorities were involved in beating the confessions out of the prisoners. Then it does make you wonder if there are fake inmates who are tied to such an extreme sense of torture. Polar Wolf Prison. Within close proximity of the Owl Prison, the Polar Wolf Prison is also located in the Arctic and is around 1,200 miles north of Moscow. As soon as you walk here, you will feel the temperatures plummeting to minus 13 degrees Fahrenheit. The Polar Wolf Prison is one of the worst detention centers for inmates. Criminals and repeat offenders who have a sentence of over 20 years hanging on their heads are the ones who usually find themselves here. There are reported to be about 460,000 inmates inside the prison. The rooms are small with cot beds, so you can imagine how crammed up the spaces would be. An inmate cannot even walk 100 steps without colliding with another prisoner. However, the reason why this prison gained a lot of attention was because of the numerous reports of the torture these prisoners face on a daily basis. The inmates are at the mercy of the prison guards. They can enforce control however they like, even if it is through beatings and electric shocks. The prisoners with the worst fate would find themselves locked in an iron box in a fetal position. The box is suffocating, making it harder to breathe. Plus, anyone locked inside is forced to urinate on themselves, humiliating the inmate even more. The solitary confinement lasted for over 300 days, as long or short as the guards wanted. Threats are pretty common. If it isn't that, there is likely to be bullying done on different occasions throughout the day, and complaining only makes things worse for the cellmates. If they say they are hungry, the prisoners would be fed slop. If they say they are cold, the guards would lower down further on the heat. Even physical pain from exercise is responded to with more vigorous routines for the whining prisoner. Coming to the facility means you're being stripped of your rights, and all complaints would only echo off the walls and return back empty-handed. But that's not all. Some of the troublemakers were forced to sit naked in the cold cells or with a set of wet clothes. The temperatures don't help either. The winters are long and harsh, followed by summers that are filled with mosquitoes. This rough temperature change is something that the prison guards use to create an atmosphere of control. The inmates are forced to stand outside for 30 to 40 minutes. If anyone claps their hands or rubs them together for warmth, the whole squad gets punished with a spray of water cannon dumped all over them. The torture doesn't end in summer either. The mosquitoes fill up the air, and the prisoners who wear light clothing are subjected to the ferocious bites of these pesky insects. If even a single prisoner flinches with the mosquito bite, the whole group is hosed down with water. The walking yards aren't any better than the rooms. You can hardly walk 11 steps inside the confinement room. Plus, there may be iron bars on the ceilings, but it almost feels like an open cage, just a different one from the room inside. Every morning at 5 a.m., the jail would erupt with songs of a pro-Putin singer. The guards wake up the inmates, and then the Russian anthem echoes in the air. This is followed by a list or preset of pro-Putin songs that everyone is forced to listen to. Otherwise, you'd be in for a smacking surprise. Alexei Navalny was the most famous inmate in this prison. He would get regular beatings for petty things like washing his hands for a long time or unbuttoning the top of his shirt. The guards would be merciless on him. Viewers were in a state of utter shock when he mysteriously disappeared from view. A little later, it was found that he had taken away his own life. But the media believes that he was subjected to torture, and the matter was hushed away. If you think this is worse, you have no idea what else we have on our list. Black Dolphin. Black Dolphin is the highest security prison in the country, and it is surrounded by myths, scandals, and secrets that can make anyone run in the opposite direction. It is easily one of the most feared facilities in the world, not just in Russia. The reason why it has this reputation is because no inmate has ever stepped out of prison. Whoever goes here doesn't come out alive. Located at a remote location, the transportation of the inmates is handled secretly, so they have no clue where they are being shipped off. They are brought in a special position, blindfolded, so that they cannot map out an escape route or know too much about the location. The interesting thing is that it is not just for the transportation of inmates inside the prison, but for when they are being shifted from one building to another too. The position in which these inmates are transported is pretty unique. They are forced to bend with their hands tied in handcuffs behind their backs, but a little higher above the hips. Now you might consider it insane, but do you know the kind of people that come here? The criminals sent here are some of the worst people on the planet. They were issued life sentences without parole and found themselves spending the rest of their lives in this prison. You can only imagine the special atrocities the prison guards had in store to show these prisoners. Each of the rooms has a special description telling why the criminal is doing their time. A paper with their criminal records is stamped on the front door. This was done intentionally to remove any guilt or mercy the prison guards may feel for them. You'd be angry too if you knew what these people did. With over 700 inmates, there was a shocking report that made it to the internet that sort of justified the reason these punishments were so severe. Together, the combined number of people being ripped apart from their families goes well beyond 1,000, giving each inmate an average of at least 5 cases. Imagine the painful torture these people have pulled on innocent families. The funny thing is that the prisoners realize the intensity of their crimes within a few weeks spent in the facility. Living in an isolated cell, there are 3 sets of steel doors that guard their cramped rooms. The inmates are basically living in a cell inside a cell tucked away at the corner of the room. The inmates are always under surveillance from a security camera so that they do not pull off something stupid. Plus, there are motion and light detectors too to keep the prisoners on the toes of their feet at all times. This room might feel trapped, which is why they are let out every once in a while. The inmates only leave their small cage for 90 minutes and then they have to return back. But the walk outside isn't so catchy either. Their steps take them to a relatively larger cell, and that's just to check for contrabands on the inmates. Inside the room, they are not allowed to sit or lie down on the bunk beds. Sometimes, the inmates are forced to stand once they wake up and are demanded to stay in that position until bedtime. That's nearly 16 hours. A prison guard makes a round every 15 minutes or so to see if the inmate is complying with the orders. If they don't listen, the guards aren't very merciful with their beatings. Sometimes, all you have to do is piss off the prison guard and you are having a pretty different night than you planned. There are reports that the criminals go through rigorous electric shocks to their reproductive organs. That's not all. Often, the guards would give them a special form of torture, bursting their veins or injuring their legs to the point that they were limping for days. The food isn't very good either. The prisoners are offered 4 cans of soup each day and they must make their peace with it. For entertainment purposes, they are only allowed a bunch of newspapers and magazines, but the collection is obviously pretty controlled and limited. Plus, there is an exercise yard where they can spend their time for around an hour, giving them an ounce of freedom in their monotonous day. Many prisoners who were interviewed all tell the same tale. They regret ever picking up on the instinct to do crime. They firmly believe that ending their lives is better than doing the time for their crime in these isolation cells. Plus, the line is pretty blurred on these humans being treated like animals, and that's crossed a lot of times. Even the criminals sometimes feel like they aren't humans anymore. Btia Prison. The Btia Prison tells a story about the harsh living conditions and the extreme violation of human rights inside the cells. You'd be surprised to find out how. Acting as a central transit prison, the Btia holds the title of being the largest remand prison in Moscow. This means that the prisoners of all kinds are brought to this prison. Many of them pass their time here until they are ready to be taken to court for their hearings. Even the inmates who spend as little as over a month here do not tell a good side of the prison, and that should tell you enough about the facility. Russia doesn't only have cold prisons, but there are also a bunch of facilities that go burning hot in the summer. Btia is one of them, and you just can't paint a nice picture of it. With the high temperatures comes unbearable heat that many prisoners are unable to face. Even though it is the largest prison, it is known to be overcrowded. Around 100 people are stuffed inside a single cell. There is no room to breathe nor to cope with the scorching hot temperatures, meaning that the heat is a burden for many. The reason why it is so cramped up is because around 30,000 inmates are brought into the prison each year. That's a crazy amount with no regulation on the heads of the authorities. Plus, you wouldn't be able to walk 2 steps without hugging another cellmate. This is what has spiked up the heat levels too, and caused more deaths and injuries among the crowd. A lot of inmates that come here are subjected to drug abuse. But since each cell has only one needle, the whole squad of 100 cellmates rely on the same needle to feed their addictions. That has made the facility pretty prone to carrying AIDS and tuberculosis. No prisoner lives here that isn't affected. Even the prisoners who are coming in are brought in the same trucks so they can develop early immunity. That's how bad it is. There are a lot of reports that suggest that no prisoner inside the Btia prison is in good health, and that's a shocking statement to consider. You are probably thinking how the guards could even allow a single needle to pass through the steel bars. But that's the thing. Maybe it is all intentional and a different kind of punishment for the prisoners. And this is just one part of it. The torture inside these cells goes unreported. But you can guess that the torture was bad when 3 prisoners decided to escape the facility. And it wasn't just one lucky inmate, but 3 of them that had used a pin to dig a hole about 23 inches long and wide. The prisoners didn't go very far, though. 2 of them were caught after a couple of weeks, and the other one was arrested within a year. He must have had the long haul, but he was thrown back into the same torturous jail from where he had fled. Apart from all of this, some prisoners seem to think that Btia is a resort as compared to other prisons. But they wouldn't be wrong, since this prison, with its hidden secrets about tortured beatings, there is the fact that you can smuggle pretty much all the good things here. Sometimes the guard helps you out with the trades, and other times the lawyers are involved in the game too. From alcohol and drugs to food, you can get a lot done with a few bucks. The only problem is that the prison guards can run a search operation anytime, and that doesn't end well for the inmates carrying contrabands. Again, it could be a ruthless tactic to target prisoners, first allowing them the use of contrabands behind closed curtains, and then pulling off the classic search operation. Whatever it may be, the Btia prison doesn't have the best of reputations, and there are a lot of people who would agree on that. White Swan Prison. One of the most notorious prisons in the country has to be the White Swan Prison. Kept especially for the serious offenders and the worst criminals in the country, the White Swan Prison does a terrible job at hosting them. But that's the whole point of the facility, to keep the criminals on the edges of their seats. It falls in the list of the 7 most high-security prisons in the country. If the criminals are coming here, they know that they are going to have a rough time with no regard for their complaints or their rights. But since inmates who are sentenced to life are the ones kept in this facility, you cannot expect any less of a warm welcome for these criminals. The facility is massive, but only hosts about 300 inmates. They are spread out in less than half of the land of the prison. It isn't overcrowded, though. Each cell has about 3 inmates, and they are watched on the clock. They are even made to change in front of the guards in a panicked hurry under a deadline. We all know how it would end if they didn't change in time. But the biggest reason why this prison is feared is because there is no outside communication allowed in the facility. Forget smuggling mobiles inside the prison, you cannot even watch the television or listen to the radio if you are spending the time for your crime here. But outside communication is not just restricted to mobile phones. No! The prisoners are not even allowed to have any visitors. Plus, they are only allowed to bathe once a week for 15 minutes. It might sound crazy, but it is still something compared to other prisons where you cannot even step outside the prison cell. Imagine serving a life sentence and you cannot even meet your loved ones. That's the torturous punishment this facility has designated for the people who have done the worst of deeds. They either say goodbye to their loved ones before going to prison or die with the guilt of knowing what could have happened if they hadn't done the crime. But you haven't listened to the shocking part yet. The prison is equipped with trained psychologists whose job is to assess the mental health of the inmates. Now you might even admire the initiative, but hold that thought. The psychologists are present in the facility to prevent the inmates from going crazy. Many people report that the criminals didn't even spend a few months in prison and ended up going insane. The prison authorities knew what they were doing when they hired the psychologists. They knew that the prison that they had built was a living hell, and the prisoners wouldn't last a long time here. So they got the experts to check every once in a while whether they were allowed to hang in another load of torture on the inmate. They can't really complain because the prisoners aren't allowed to bat an eye on the guards. The inmates remain behind the steel bars, on their knees and facing the doors until a prison guard comes and fetches them away. But the transportation is not very simple. Instead of dragging them around the building, the guards have a special protocol designed for the inmates. They are to be blindfolded at all times during the shifting so that they cannot figure out the escape routes. But that's not all. They are supposed to walk while bending their backs, forcing their heads down, and pushing their hands high up in the air. The prisoners have called out this unique position as a resemblance to a swan, and you cannot deny it does appear like that. The inmates are allowed to leave their small rooms to go out in the courtyard. It is where they can exercise and walk around freely for a few minutes out of the day, but the courtyard isn't very big. With only a few feet of walking space available, it serves as the only place where the prisoners can taste a bit of freedom inside the facility. That's all on Russia's most dangerous and brutal mega-prisons of all time. If the criminals only knew what they were going to face in these prisons, they would never touch a weapon. Do you think these high-security prisons deal with criminals the right way? Or are you an advocate of how they should be given their rights? Let us know in the comments below. We would love to hear your thoughts. Leave a thumbs up if you liked the video and subscribe if you want to see more of such videos on your feed. We have a lot more to show you, so stay tuned. Until then, goodbye and thanks for watching.